Vivid verses.
I noticed the first one in March, on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays are when I reconcile the household account against the mortgage draw. It was £42 and 50 pence, cash withdrawal, a corner shop ATM, two postcodes from anywhere either of us worked or shopped. I stared at it for maybe 4 seconds, decided it was nothing, a coffee run that got out of hand, a favor for a friend, 40 quid in the scheme of a joint account that moved thousands a month, and closed the tab. That's the thing about small numbers. They're designed to be forgotten. Nobody builds a lie around a figure large enough to be noticed. They build it around a figure small enough to be shrugged at, repeated often enough that it adds up to something real. I didn't go looking for a second one. It found me, the way these things do once your eye's been trained on a pattern without your permission. April, £38, same type of withdrawal, different ATM, same blind 2-mile radius outside our normal orbit. May, 2 withdrawals, £55 and £29, 9 days apart. By June, I wasn't reconciling the account out of habit anymore. I was reading it like a ledger with something buried in it, because that's what it had become. I want to be precise about what I felt, because precision is the only honest way to describe it. I didn't feel betrayed. Not yet. Betrayal requires a conclusion, and I hadn't reached one. What I felt was closer to the sensation of a tire losing pressure, so slowly you can't hear the hiss, only notice weeks later that the car pulls slightly to the left. Something was off. I didn't know what. I had no intention of announcing that I'd noticed until I did. Naomi and I had been together 6 years, married 2 of them, and if you'd asked me in February to describe our finances, I'd have called them unremarkable. We split bills by proportion of income, mine higher, hers steadier. She worked events management, feast or famine, and I worked risk analysis for an insurer, which paid predictably and boringly, which is exactly how I like to be paid. We had a joint account for the house and shared costs and separate accounts for everything else, an arrangement we'd built together, sensibly, the way 2 adults build something that's supposed to survive contact with reality. So when the shape of a second account within an account started to appear, withdrawals with no receipt, no explanation offered because none had been asked for, my first instinct wasn't confrontation. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't fear of the conversation. I don't avoid conversations. It was that I didn't yet know what I'd be confronting her about. A woman moving small cash, sums out a joint account, could be funding 100 things, a gift she was hiding, a debt of her sister's, a habit, a person. Confronting her with £40 and a theory would hand her the exact information she needed to construct an explanation good enough to close the subject before I understood it. I've built models for a living long enough to know that if you show your hand before you have the full picture, you don't get the full picture. You get a story instead. So I decided to get the picture first. I didn't say anything to her that week or the one after, though I noticed I'd started watching her hands when she reached for her phone at dinner, the way she'd angle the screen a few degrees more than she used to. I noticed and said nothing because noticing and saying are 2 different disciplines, and I had only ever been good at conflating them when it didn't matter. What I did instead was open a spreadsheet, not on our shared cloud drive, a fresh one, local, password protected, the kind of file you build when you've stopped assuming your privacy is guaranteed. Date, amount, location, account balance before and after. I went back through 6 months of statements first, then started logging forward in real time. By July, I had 11 entries. The total wasn't enormous, just over £400, which told me 2 things. 1, this wasn't a crisis-level drain. Whatever it was sustainable, meaning it had likely been running longer than I'd caught, or was about to scale. 2, the amounts were increasing slightly, not dramatically, but the trend line was up, not flat. Something was accelerating. Slowly, the way a fuse does before it isn't slow anymore. I want to say clearly because it matters to how this story should be read. I never once considered raising my voice about it, then or later. I've watched other men do that. Corner a partner over a receipt, demand an accounting, treat suspicion like it entitles them to a verdict on the spot. It's not restraint I admire in that approach. It's the waste. You spend your only element of surprise on a feeling, and you get nothing back for it except her adrenaline and your own exposed hand. I wasn't interested in her fear. I was interested in the truth, and the truth doesn't respond well to being shouted at. It goes quiet. It waits you out. So I decided to outwait it instead. The first real decision I made, the one that mattered, the one everything after followed from, was in the second week of July, a Sunday evening, Naomi at her sister's for the night. I opened a new account. Not hidden exactly. There was no version of my life where I needed to hide a bank account from anyone but her, and even then, only for a while. But separate, solely mine, no joint access, no shared notifications. I moved the standing order for my salary there the following Monday. I kept a fixed, calculated sum flowing into the joint account each month, precisely enough to cover the mortgage, utilities, the two of our joint subscriptions, and nothing more. No cushion, no excess for her to draw down against without me noticing exactly how much. It wasn't an act of anger. I need that understood. It was an act of exposure, hers, not mine. As long as my full income sat in an account she had access to, her withdrawals were invisible, absorbed into a pool large enough to hide ripples. The moment I reduced that pool to precisely what our known obligations required, any unexplained draw would show up immediately, sharply, against a balance with nowhere to hide it. I wasn't protecting my money. I was building a mirror and pointing it at her. She didn't notice for 3 weeks. That told me something too, that she wasn't checking the account closely either, which meant whatever she was funding, she believed the joint pool to be functionally bottomless, the way people believe about resources they've never had to manage themselves. I let that belief run. I paid the bills on time, same as always, said nothing about balances, made no reference to money at all beyond the ordinary logistics of a shared life. Whose turn to do the shop, whether the boiler service was due. Life on the surface through July and into August looked exactly like it always had. We went to her cousin's engagement party. We argued mildly about whether to repaint the hallway, the kind of argument that's really about nothing and ends in someone making tea. We had sex twice that I remember clearly, and it wasn't strange or cold, which surprised me a little. I'd expected some private tell to leak into it, some evidence I was compartmentalizing badly, but I wasn't. I was doing the thing I'm apparently built to do, which is hold two entirely separate processes in parallel without one contaminating the other, a marriage and an audit. I did notice her phone habits shift, though, not dramatically, but enough. She'd started taking calls in the spare room with the door shut, always framed as work, always at odd hours for events management, evenings mostly. She'd started leaving her laptop closed and angled away from the sofa where she used to leave it open. None of it was proof of anything specific. All of it was consistent with the shape I already suspected, that there was a second financial life running in parallel to ours, quietly, and that it had a person or a purpose attached to it that she didn't want visible. By late August, the withdrawals had climbed to 70 pounds, 95 pounds, one at 110 pounds, a jump large enough that I assumed whatever this was funding had entered a new phase. I still didn't ask. I did something more useful instead. I started paying closer attention to the timing, not just the dates of the withdrawals, but what surrounded them. The 110 pounds one landed the same week she'd mentioned, almost in passing, that a friend from her old job, Priya, someone I'd met twice, years ago, at a leaving do, had gone through a rough patch and Naomi had been keeping an eye on her. I filed that. I didn't ask a single follow-up question. Follow-up questions are how people learn you're paying attention, and I wasn't ready to be visible yet. September gave me the shape of it, mostly by accident, mostly because people who are hiding something eventually get careless about the parts of the hiding that don't feel like the important parts. I was clearing out the recycling and found the torn corner of an envelope, a payment confirmation slip, the kind that comes with certain money transfer services, addressed not to Priya, but to a name I didn't recognize at all, a man's name, no context attached beyond a reference number, and a partial amount that matched almost exactly the running total I'd logged since March. I sat with that for longer than I've sat with anything in years. Not because it confirmed an affair, it didn't confirm anything. Not on its own. A name and a number torn from an envelope proves nothing you could stand behind. What it confirmed was that the money had a destination outside our life, sustained, deliberate, and specifically not something she felt she could tell me. Whatever the full story was, a person, a debt, a rescue she'd taken on quietly and was too proud or too frightened to admit. She had chosen, repeatedly, over 6 months, to fund it through omission rather than conversation. That was the fact I could actually work with. Not the mystery of who. The fact of the choice. I didn't search his name. I want to note that, because it would have been easy, and it would have told me nothing useful that patience wouldn't tell me better. Whatever this was, it would surface on its own terms the way debts always do. Not through discovery, but through the moment somebody needs more than they have. That moment came in October, on a Thursday, which felt almost too neat, 6 months to the week since the first withdrawal I'd logged. She came in from work later than usual, put her keys down harder than she meant to, and asked, too casually, the practice casual of someone who'd rehearsed the line on the drive home, whether I could sub the joint account a bit this month just till payday. Things have been tight. I asked how tight. 600, she said. Maybe 650. I knew from the log I'd been keeping for 7 months that our actual joint obligations that month were fully covered. I knew, because I'd built the account specifically to reveal this exact moment, that there was no version of tight in our real shared cost that produced a 600-pound hole. The hole was hers. It had always been hers. She'd simply never had to say so out loud before, because the account used to be deep enough to swallow it without a ripple. I didn't ask what it was for. I didn't accuse her of anything, didn't reference the envelope, didn't mention the months of withdrawals I tracked to the pound. I've thought about why, afterward, and the honest answer is that asking would have given her the opening to explain, and an explanation at that moment would have been a performance, not a truth, crafted on the spot to fit whatever she thought I already knew. I wasn't interested in a performance. I'd waited 7 months for the real thing, and the real thing doesn't arrive through a question. It arrives through the absence of an easy answer. I can't move that, I said. The account's exactly where it needs to be for what we actually owe this month. She looked at me for a second too long, the way you look at someone when a system you've relied on quietly, without ever examining it, has just failed for the first time, and you're recalculating in real time whether it was ever the system you thought it was. I thought there was more room than that, she said. There isn't, I said. There hasn't been for a while. I didn't elaborate. I let the sentence sit exactly where I placed it, and I watched her do what people do when a supply they've been quietly depending on disappears without warning. She went very still, and then very careful, the stillness of someone doing arithmetic she doesn't want me to see her doing. She didn't ask again that night. She didn't ask the next night either. 3 days later, I heard her on the phone in the spare room, voice low, the tone of someone renegotiating a deadline rather than asking for money. And I understood then that whatever the 600 pounds was for, whoever the name on that torn slip belonged to, she was going to have to face it without the safety net she'd built her entire arrangement around. The assumption that I would never look closely enough to notice the net wasn't hers to lean on anymore. I want to be clear that I never delivered an ultimatum. I never told her I knew. I never staged a reveal, because a reveal is a performance too, and I'd already decided I wasn't interested in giving her, or myself, a scene. What I'd built instead was simpler and, I think, more honest. A structure in which the truth would have to surface on its own weight, because I'd removed every soft place it could have kept landing. Over the following fortnight, she changed in ways she probably thought were subtle. She stopped taking calls in the spare room and started taking them outside, on the street, further from the house. She sold something. I noticed a bracelet she'd worn most days for years simply wasn't there one Sunday, and never came back. She asked me, once, almost testing, whether I'd been keeping a closer eye on the account lately, and I told her, truthfully, that I always had. She never told me who the money was for. I've made peace with the fact that I may never know the full shape of it. A debt she'd inherited from someone she loved and couldn't say so. A man she'd been protecting or being protected by. Something she'd started before us and never fully closed. It doesn't change the part of the story that was actually mine to answer, which wasn't who, but whether I was going to keep funding a life I wasn't being told the truth about. I wasn't. In November, she moved out. Not dramatically, not in the middle of a fight, just quietly, the way I'd have expected by then. Boxes over 2 weekends, a flat she said she'd already been looking at for a while, which told me, without either of us needing to say it aloud, that the account I'd sealed off in July hadn't just been protecting money. It had been protecting the one thing she couldn't rebuild once it was gone. The certainty that I'd never notice. People who hear the outline of this afterward always ask the same question, and it's always some version of didn't you want to confront her, get it out, make her say it to your face. I understand the instinct behind the question, even if I've never shared it. Confrontation gives you volume. It doesn't give you truth. What gives you truth is patience applied precisely enough that the other person's own choices eventually do the confronting for you. And by the time they do, you're not asking questions anymore. You're simply present for the answer, already prepared, already several steps ahead of whatever version of events they're about to offer. I never raised my voice once the whole 7 months. I never asked her outright what the money was for, never demanded she explain the envelope, never gave her the chance to construct a story built specifically to survive my anger. I gave her exactly what I'd give any pattern I was trying to understand. Enough rope, enough silence, enough time for the shape of it to become undeniable on its own. By the time she left, there was nothing left to say that the numbers hadn't already said for both of us. I didn't need her confession. I had 7 months of statements, a torn envelope, a bracelet that stopped appearing on her wrist, and an account that had quietly, deliberately stopped being a place she could hide in. That was never going to be an argument I won by shouting. It was only ever going to be one I won by watching, calmly, until the arithmetic did what arithmetic always does eventually. It told the truth, whether or not anyone was ready to say it out loud.
Thanks for listening.